We're going over System Pticha, Preface to the Wisdom of Kabbalah by Bala Sulam. Chapter 4, the Hizdakhut, purification of the Masach, screen, to the Atzilut, emanation of the Partzuf, face. Session 18, screen, purification. Purification of the screen.
Purification of the screen by Baha Salam, number 30. To understand the issue of the concatenation of the degrees by 5 levels, one below the other, explained above concerning the 5 partzufim, faces, of Ak, primordial man, as well as in all of the degrees appearing in the 5 partzufim, faces, of each world of the 4 worlds, Abia, emanation, creation, formation, and action, through Malhut kingdom of Asiya, action, we must thoroughly understand the issue of Hizdakhut, purification of the Masak Deguf, screen of the body, implemented in each of the partzufim, faces of Ak, primordial man, the world of Nicodemus, deficiencies, and the world of Tikkun, correction. Explanation number 30. To understand the issues of the concatenation of the degrees by 5 levels, one below the other, explained above concerning the 5 faces of primordial man after the barrier, as well as in all of the degrees appearing in the 5 faces of each world of the 4 worlds, emanation, observation, creation, affinity, formation, communication, action, reality. Through kingdom of action, reality, we must thoroughly understand the issue of the purification of the screen when at the body degree, implemented in each of the faces of primordial man, the world of deficiencies and the world of correction.
5 faces of primordial man. Explanation. Item 30. To understand the issue of the concatenation of the degrees by 5 levels, one below the other, explained above concerning the 5 faces of primordial man after the barrier. So we talked about in the previous session of how this is all the faces of the world of Adam Kadmon, which is primordial man. And we start when we cross the barrier. We have those 3 days of like feeling flat, having sort of no internal power, no power at all, which is sort of one of the differences between the way that most people envision crossing the barrier. They envision themselves being like shined on with lights and stuff like that. It's like, no, when you actually cross the barrier, you feel flat. You're not happy, you're not sad, you're not powerful, you're not powerful, you're just flat. And that normally lasts for like 3 days. And then the lights do come into your state, which is called a face in spirituality. And the first face is Partzuf Gilgalta, which is the face of skull. We call this 1.1. And you have the Rosh, the head, which is the calculation of how much you're going to receive and how much you're going to be reflecting onto reality. So the idea is that the big, huge difference between a person after the barrier and before the barrier, a person feels himself part of reality, part of the corporeal world that he lives in. And after the barrier, the person has this distance where they feel themselves separate from the world they're living in. And that separation is felt even when the lights aren't there, but it's more apparent when the lights are in. So when the lights are apparent, when the lights are in, when the person is feeling the internal power, then they feel that distance from reality accordingly. So the whole state of the world of primordial man is dealing with the major light of nefesh, relaxation. And we talked about it, that relaxation is the feeling of distance from reality as being an observer, but without actually interacting. So yes, your body's still doing things, and you're still going to the bathroom, and you're still eating food, and still going to work, and still doing all that stuff. But you just feel this little distance. It's like you're watching a movie of a person going to work. You're watching a movie of someone going to the bathroom or eating food or even fighting with their wife or whatever. But the idea is that a person is feeling like he's watching his reality play out in front of him instead of feeling that they're in it. And that's what the light of relaxation gives on a major level. And then you've got sub-degrees of that, where you have the highest feeling of that relaxation is felt as a sub-degree of, we call it Keter Crown, which is Yichida singularity. So singularity is like the highest feeling of relaxation. And then what happens is it gradually goes down, and you feel less and less of that relaxation, which means you're feeling closer and closer to reality, but there's still a distance the whole way down. So in the Parzuf al-Gagata, the face of skull, it divides into the interior, which is called the Toch, and the Sof, which is the end. And the idea is that the end is, from the tabor of the navel until the Siyum end of legs is considered the ego, egoism. So all these spiritual phases that we go through from 1.1 to 1.4 after the barrier, we're feeling above our egos. We're feeling that separation from our egoistic desires. And we call those altruism, which is a internal egoism. So you've got normally what we call egoism, which is external, and then we've got altruism, which is an internal egoism, a corrected egoism. And once we feel that we've crossed the barrier, we feel flat, then the light comes into our spiritual face. We suddenly feel the distance, and we feel free from reality. And it's a great feeling, but there's no discernment there. There's no details. And then the light dissipates. It normally can take a few days for that to happen. The light goes out. You're back to feeling flat again. And then that will also be for a few days. And then you get the second face, which is Parzuf Ab, the face of Ab, which is completing the 1.1. Because the idea of 1.1, which is unformed, you're going to go through the process of the light coming into you and going out of you and coming in. And then you know that there's a flow. You feel that cycle of growth. And again, you also have the Rosh, the head, which is the calculation of how much how much tension are you going to be receiving, and how much can you reflect on that and actually use it. And the rest you're going to push away, which is basically the tension of your true egoism. You're going to push it away, which is that phase 4, the egoism. And the second Parzuf, which is Ab, deals with the vessel of Chokhmah, wisdom, and the degree of light is called Chaya, expression. And remember, we're talking about that the major level is relaxation, right, nefesh, but it's like Chaya de nefesh. So it's the expression of relaxation. And then in Ab, what happens, you start getting some details. You start able to discern your state, because the light has come in and come out. You actually are, even though your feeling of separation from reality is it's decreased, you actually feel closer to reality, but then details actually come in. You actually start, certain desires start arising within you, normally from other people. So that's why it's altruistic. They're not desires that aren't in you. You normally start wanting things that other people want, that you might have never wanted before. But other people want it, and suddenly you want it. Then the light, you'll have that for a few days or whatever. It's not
fixed. And then the light will dissipate, and then you'll reach parts of Sag, the face of Sag, which is 1.2. This is already when you've gone through the training, now you're going through experience. And this is where you feel less of that separation from reality. You're a little closer now. You're still not in it, but you're still closer. And this is called the vessel of Bina, understanding. And you get the light of Neshama, protection, where protection is you're a little closer, but you're still protected. You still feel that distance. And then, after a few days, the light will dissipate from the Parzuf, from the spiritual face. And then you enter Parzuf Ma, face of Ma, 1.3. 1.3, we call it lack of ego. Why? Because now you're no longer in protection, you're in modulation of relaxation. And this is where you actually feel that wow, I actually need my ego after all. That before, when you're like, oh, I just wish I could get out of my ego and the world would be great. Then you actually start to feel, well, actually, because you've got less of that separation, you actually feel, wow, there's actually a use for my egoism. But you feel it as a deficiency, like a vessel. And that is Tiferet, beauty. And it's called with the light of Ruach, which is modulation, because you're feeling that those changes within you, you're being modulated. You're sort of having these ups and downs of feeling like, oh, I actually want my ego. Why don't I have my ego? Oh, I really do need my ego. And then when you finally reach Patsuf Bon, face of Bon, 1.4, this is where you're really close now to your egoism, which means you're close to reality. And you feel, in the vessel of Malchut kingdom, you finally feel the light of Nefesh relaxation, which means this is when you're really close and you basically understand what I need to do is not feel the deficiency of my egoism. Now I need to desire my egoism. And that desire of your egoism is what will enable you to enter 2.1 afterwards, where you'll be going below the tabor of the navel, and you'll be entering your egoism. It won't be like the egoism before, but you're going to go back into your egoism. Four worlds, as well as in all the degrees appearing in the five faces of each world. Of the four worlds, emanation, observation, creation, affinity, formation, communication, action, reality, through kingdom of action, reality. So what we dealt with beforehand was the phases above the ego. And then what we have afterwards is we have the four worlds which are in the egoism, right, below the tabor, the navel. So from the tabor of the navel until the Simriglin end of legs, these divide into four worlds that you're basically going to be dealing from 2.1 until endocorrection in revealing them and going through breaking the vessels and stuff like that, which we'll see soon. We'll go through all the phases. And then after endocorrection, you're basically constantly dealing with all the worlds that you've revealed. So you're dealing with the worlds of primordial man, which is dealing with your relationship of what you think of others, that observational outlook of what I think of others. And then you'll have these four worlds as well of different various sensations about yourself. So we'll go through each one, and we'll go from the bottom. So we start with Olam Hazeh, this world. And the question that sort of, how to identify if we're talking about this world, Olam Hazeh, the question is, what do I physically sense in reality? So what do I see in my physical senses? That is considered this world, right? It's corporeal, and there's a pulling force in reality that constantly wants you to deal with it. And that is considered this world. If we go a step higher, now we're actually entering into the spiritual worlds, which is above the end of legs. We have four worlds. So we've got Asiya, which is action. And this is dealing with reality. What does this mean? This is how reality makes me feel. So it's how does nature or objects make me feel. If I'm playing a game of chess, the way the chess game makes me feel, let's say I win or lose, the way I feel about the chess game, that is considered, those feelings or emotions are in, or even thoughts are in the world of Asiya, action, because it's talking about reality. Then we have the next world, which is Yetzirah, formation, which is called communication. And the question here that someone should ask, how do people make me feel? So unlike reality, where if I'm playing a game of chess with a person, if I lose the game and I look at the game that I've lost and I feel terrible because I lost the game, that's reality. But if the person who I'm playing against heckles me, then the feeling that I feel terrible because he heckled me, that is the world of communication. So it's a deeper level within the person, because they're not just dealing with how their senses respond to them, but now they're also dealing with the idea of understanding that there's human behind it, a human like them. It gives them more sort of effect. That if an object, so it's like if I bump into a table, I'm not going to feel the same as if someone punches me. So it is, if I bump into a table and I feel terrible, that's reality. But if someone hurts me, either with words or with actions, that is communication. And I feel it much worse. I feel it on a more deeper level than when reality hits me. And the same if it's positive, right? I will feel more positivity from communication than from reality. That's why we say that connection is will make a person happier than just dealing with corporeal objects. Then we have the next world, which is Bariya, creation. And this is called affinity. And the question here a person asks is, how do I feel about myself? Which is, a person wakes up in the morning, or they're driving, or they're just sitting on the couch, and they suddenly feel terrible about themselves. They're not communicating with anybody. They're not dealing with any reality that is making them feel bad. They just feel that inner emptiness, that they feel, I'm not worth anything. And those feelings are felt in the world of Bria creation. It's how do I feel about myself? If I feel amazing about myself, irrelevant of communication or reality, that's that affinity. What kind of affinity do I have towards myself? How do I feel? What is my self-value? And that is the world of Bria creation, affinity. And then above, these are all below the parsa, the diaphragm. And we have above the parsa of the diaphragm, we have the world of Atzilut, emanation, which is called observation. This is the feeling where I ask the question, how much control do I feel over my life? So it's not how do I feel about myself, which is affinity, which is sort of self-value. With Atzilut, with the world of emanation, it's more of an observation of how much sensation of control do I feel that I'm having over my life? How much do I feel that I'm advancing? How much do I feel that I'm in control? So unlike with the worlds of Bria creation, Yetzirah formation, and Asiya action, which are normally responses or reactive behavior to this world, Olam Hazeh, in the world of Atzilut, it's like separate, and that's what the diaphragm shows. That shows that separation between having a response to reality and observing it irrelevant of the response. So, for example, someone could be playing a chess game against someone, and they lose, right? The king is toppled over, checkmate. The person feels terrible that they lost the game. That feeling is in reality. Then the person that they're playing against, their player, heckles them and says, "Oh, look at you, loser." They feel that in communication. Then the person might feel, "Oh, I've always been this terrible. I can't play anything. I'm useless. There's nothing I'm good at." That is affinity. And then finally, at that same time, the person could be in an observation of, "Oh, look at that. How I give so much importance to just a game. It's just a game. Why am I sort of tying myself so much to it?" So at the same time, a person is having these four different feelings, and those represent the four worlds of observation, affinity, communication, and reality.
I have a question, Zakai, about Berea, the world of creation. The first time you explained that world, you kind of used negative connotations. I feel worthless, or I feel empty, or I feel whatever. But that Berea is, how do I feel about myself? Could be either positive or negative, right?
That is true, but the thing is that most people in the world of Bria actually feel it as darkness. And it's also another term that is used for Bria, is the world of darkness. Because the idea is that most people don't really deal too much with their sense of self, and what they normally do is they retreat to lower degrees of communication or reality. So instead of feeling how they feel about themselves, they'll immediately either deal with, "Oh, how that person hurt my feelings. How could he hurt my feelings?" Or, "Oh, how did I lose that money? And how did I lose this? And oh, I'm a terrible person, I lost that." So they're not focusing on how they feel about themselves, irrelevant of situations or events they're going through. They constantly retreat to the lower degrees, and they want to feel like how people hurt their feelings, or how they, reality made them feel loss. And the idea is that as you increase your internal power, the idea is to reach a point where you're actually okay with your affinity, and that you actually love yourself, irrelevant of events. You are just an awesome human being. Doesn't matter if you're doing good deeds or doing nothing. You could be sitting on the couch doing absolutely nothing, and you feel that you're the most powerful, awesome person on earth.
Thank you.
You can do it only if you go to Atzilut and correct yourself. Let's say.
That is true. Part of the way to actually get our feeling about ourselves corrected is what we do, and we'll see it in the phases, that we raise these 3 degrees into our observation and include them within it, so that we have an observational ability over our affinity, over our communication, over our reality. So we're actually able to ask these questions and feel those observations even when we're going through those different emotions.
So instead of going down to Yetzirah formation and action, you have to go up to emanation, and then
exactly you include. It's just like we say that the egoism is included into the screen, right? So that process here is repeated, where we raise Bria, Tzia, Nasiya, which is creation, formation, and action, and we raise it in termination. We give it a different connotation, a different meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we correct those words.
We raise them by correction, or we get the correction after we raise them?
The raising is the correction, because once they enter the observation, that's the correction. The correction of any quality we have in us is always that ability to be able to observe it. So you could say an uncorrected quality is when we can't observe it, that when it gets activated, it just drags us down. And the correction of it is when it no longer drags us down because we have an observation capability, we have critical thinking over what we're going through. So when we have the emotion, we still retain our critical thinking. And what normally happens is when someone goes into an emotional state, they lose their critical thinking. So they can think and they're very smart as long as there's no emotion, but when the emotion goes within them on a certain level, they lose themselves in the process and they can't think clearly. So the correction is the ability to always be in a state of observation of critical thinking, no matter how much emotion you're going through.
So it's a separation of your emotion from your critical thinking.
Exactly. But still allowing you to feel both. So it's not making you not feel, right? Normally people feel it's like either critical thinking or emotion. It's like, no, you can have emotion and critical thinking simultaneously.
And that's by the correction of these different states?
Exactly. And that's what the parts of the diaphragm represents. That it's called the second restriction, where you're allowing. Sometimes when you're in a first restriction, then all these worlds are in your spiritual, which means that you're not being reactive to things that happen in this world, but rather you're being active. You're in control. But what will sometimes happen, many times will happen, is that you will find your emotion suddenly becoming reactive to this world. And then what you have to do is you have to sort of release your emotion into corporeality. You have to release it and say, okay, fine, my emotion will be reactive, but I'm not going to lose my observational point. And that's what the second restriction does, where suddenly all these worlds become corporeal and only absolute emanation stays spiritual. And then you go through discernments and the acceptance and the discernments. And then when you finally sort of are able to like restore you could say your emotional dignity, then the worlds of creation, formation, and action become spiritual again. And then you return to the first restriction.
Now, when you're in reality, see an action, are you capable at that time to observe it, even though you're emotionally involved?
In what state?
Let's say in see an action, reality, before you've reached the state of absolute emanation and observation. Are you capable of having any observation at that state before then? You understand what I mean? Before you get to absolute.
Before you're emotionally turbulated, before you're emotionally
before you're corrected, you're in a siyah, the state of a siyah.
If you're getting negativity, no, you can't do the observation. The emotion overloads you, and you can't do the observation. So you can only do the observation when you're not emotionally in turmoil.
Okay, so if you were in the emotion, then you wouldn't be able to do the observation because you're not corrected at that state.
Exactly.
All right.
Like you might think, oh, I'm able to think, but you weren't able to think straight.
Never been there.
Not yet, not yet. All right, let's continue. Purification of the screen. We must thoroughly understand the issue of the purification of the screen when at the body degree. So what this whole chapter is going to be talking about is the purification of the screen. And it's 15 items that are just going to be breaking down all the process of how this happens. What is the process that makes us lose the light in each face? Because the light comes in, you think, that's it. The light comes in, I feel like that, it's great, and I can stay on like this forever. Why do I suddenly lose the light? What is the cause? And the consequence, of course, is that I lose the light. But what is the cause for losing that light? And that's exactly what we're going to be learning during the next sessions. This is just the first item, so it's just an overview. But we'll be breaking it down. What is the exact process that's happening? What is the conflict? It's called the beating between internal light and surrounding light. So if we just go over it on a high-level overview, we had our Rosh, which is our head, which is the calculation. We've got the direct light hitting the screen at the pair, the mouth. And then you've got the reflected light going back up, which is sort of doing that observation. And then the screen expands down to the tabor, the navel. So the screen goes from the pair, the mouth, all the way down to the tabor, the navel. And the light expands in it accordingly. And then from the screen below, this is where we feel the lack of the surrounding light, which means we feel the lack of what we haven't able to acquire. Because even though we've crossed the barrier and we have a screen, the screen isn't very strong. It's not very powerful. And therefore, it can't actually handle the full egoism. So what it needs to do is do a separation and say, look, I can handle root phase, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 tension, but I can't actually handle the tension of the egoism itself. So I need to feel above my egoism. And that's why the tabor, the navel, stays over here, above the egoism. Right? And end of legs, of course, Siyum is the separation where the spirituality totally ends, and then below you've got this world, which is corporeality, physicality. And then what happens is that when the lights go in, you have two sensations of light. You have the light of internal light, which is internal power, and you have surrounding light, which is power that you don't have yet. It's like future internal power. And these two desires within the individual, they clash with each other, between the present and the future. Because to reach the future, you have to give up the present. But if you want to stay with the present, you have to give up the future. And they clash with each other. And that clash causes the screen to slowly purify all the way up to the pair, the mouth. And then when it finally reaches that full purification, then it builds another state, which is another parts of face, which is called ab, which has the same process. But the idea is that, unlike beforehand, where it's going with the light of singularity, like we saw beforehand, now it's only the light of expression. It's leveled down. The reason why it's leveled down, we'll talk about it, in the following sessions, is the idea that when the screen is purifying, it has memories all the way of its experience. But the Malchut, the kingdom, the first vessel that loses its light doesn't have a memory because it has nothing to pass it on down to. And we're not going to go into this now. We're going to be dealing with this in future sessions, but I just wanted to give an overview of what happens that because the first state that loses light doesn't have a memory, since it doesn't have anything to continue from. Therefore, when the screen then expands and creates a new partzuf, it's lacking that degree, that memory, and therefore it can only go and create a smaller face with less internal light, less internal power.
What do you mean the first phase? You're saying the first or last phase? I'm not sure. Malchut.
So it's the first because the lights dissipate. The lights dissipate from the interior all the way up to the mouth. So the first vessel, which is losing its light, is the vessel of kingdom, Malchut.
So why doesn't it have a memory?
So the idea is it doesn't have a memory because for something to have a memory, it has to pass something onto. There needs to be a flow. And all these other vessels, they have a vessel beforehand, and therefore there's a memory. To have a memory, there always has to be a sort of cycle. And since the vessel of Malchut, which is kingdom, at the bottom, it doesn't pass the light on to anyone else. And therefore it can't be the start of a memory cycle. Which in Kabbalah is called the Leshima Daviyut, the memory of coarseness.
It doesn't have a Leshima Daviyut?
No.
Okay. So that's why, because of that last vessel, that's why that part, it loses its aviyut for the next one? because of that?
That's why you can't recreate it.
Right. So in this particular case, Galgalta is 4/4, Hitlapshut 4, Avyut 4, and then Ab is Hitlapshut 4, Avyut 3.
Yes.
And is it because of that missing Avyut there? Doesn't have the memory to build that last coarseness?
Exactly. And, we'll go through this more in depth in the following sessions. All right, let's move on. Barrier to end of correction. Explanation. Implemented in each of the faces of primordial man, the world of deficiencies and the world of correction. So we went in session 16, we also talked about all the phases, but here we have them all on one slide. So from the barrier to under correction, it's divided into 4 phases with subphases. So we first have Adam Kadmon, the primordial man, which is dealing with the 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 phases. So we have the Pratzuf al-Galgalta, which we just went over, which is basically the training, it's 1.1. We have Pratzuf Ab, which is we call desire, it's also 1.1. We've got Pratzuf Sag, which is experience, 1.2. We've got Pratzuf Ma, which is lack of egoism, which we talked about in 1.3. And finally, Bon, aspiration for egoism, 1.4. Then we reach the second phase called Nikodim, the world of deficiencies. And that's dealing with all the 2.x phases. So it's 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4. So we cross the parsa, which is called the diaphragm, that we do in 2.1. This is when we're going beneath the tabor of the navel. So these are all above the tabor of the navel, all these phases, above the ego. And then we go into the ego. So we're going below the tabor of the navel into the ego. And then we divide our egoism into desires of GE and Achap, where GE are desires of bestowal, and Achap are desires of reception. And then we enter into Katnut, smallness, 2.1, where we disable our Achap, which means we disable our vessels of reception, which is those emotions that we went over. Our world of creation, formation, and action, we release them into corporeality, and we only have our observation in spirituality, in that smallness. Then in 2.2, we reach Gadlut, greatness. And here it's where we then expand, we regain control over our emotion. So we regain control over the world of Baliya, creation, Yitzira, formation, and Asiya, action, which we said is affinity, communication, and reality. And we do expression in Gadlut, greatness. And then because of that expression of internal power, doing an internal manipulation of somebody else using internal power, having the goal, what happens is that it overloads us. That because we were trying to change reality, that operation basically caused us to break, and we reach that breaking, Shvirat Kalim, breaking the vessels in 2.3. And that's the shattering of the vessels. And then what happens is we sort of have to understand that we went through the breaking and it's okay, and we have to restore ourselves. And then what we understand is we need to reach the state of Bniyat Atzilut, which is building protection. That is, we understand the reason why we crashed was because we didn't have the parcel was cancelled. And because the parcel was cancelled, we didn't have any protection from falling into the expression we want to do. Because to able to use internal power, you need to, on one hand, make a manipulation reality, but not allow reality to pull you into it. And for that, for the ability to be in both states, you need that separation in between. And that separation, that protection is called Atzilut. And then we reach the third phase, Atzilut emanation. And this is 3.1 to 3.4. So we enter Atzilut protection 3.1. Just like in deficiencies, we go into smallness 3.1, where we release our emotion to corporeality. Then, because we've increased our protection and gained those more discernments of that separation, we again try Gadlut, greatness at 3.2. But then we find out that we're still not totally protected, and we break again. And it's called the Chet of Adam Arishon, the sin of the first man, at 3.3. And then we dust ourselves off and try again. we get up and we understand that what we need to do is not just separate ourselves from our emotion, but we need to do correction on the emotion as well. And this is the achanat tikkun, the preparation for correction, which is at 3.4. Then we enter the final phase of tikkun, of correction, which is from 4.1 to 4.4. So at the beginning, we enter that sort of mindset of correction, of tikkun, at 4.1. And then we start with the first correction we're going to do is with the world of Bria. So we're going to do tikkun Bria, the correction of creation, which we said is affinity. And then we do that at 4.1. So what does correction mean? We raise the emotion, the tension of the world of creation, and we raise it into emanation. We raise how we feel about ourselves. We raise it into observation. Basically giving the ability for our emotion now to have an observational vantage point. And that's what we're going to do in each correction. And then we do the same for Tikkun Yitzirah, which is the correction of formation, which we said is how people make me feel, at 4.2. We've got Tikkun Asiya, the correction of action, 4.3, which is correcting how reality makes me feel. And then finally, we reach Gemara Tikkun, end of correction, 4.4, where this is divided into resurrection of the dead, which is 4.1. This is when my egoism is fully activated, the egoism that I had before the barrier. And then I correct it at 4.4.2. Then I feel a power down, the backside of end of correction, at 4.4.3, which is also called Shimon from the Shuk, Shimon from the market. And then finally, at 4.4.4, I reach end of correction.
So there's two breakings of the vessels?
So there's breaking of the vessels, which is at 2.3, and it's called breaking of the souls at 3.3. But breaking the vessels external, and breaking the soul is internal.
Okay.
Yeah, go
the
figure.
125 degrees, and you've mentioned it earlier in one of the sessions.
So this is 125 degrees because you've got, you basically got from 1.1 to 0.1 to 4.4.4, and that basically becomes those 125 degrees.
I think he said more than, wasn't more than 125?
From the barrier to the end of correction, it's 125. So you basically have from when we're born physically until we cross the barrier, there's 125 degrees, right? From 1.1 to 4.4.4 before the barrier. Then we have another 125 degrees from the barrier to end of correction, from 1.1.1 after the barrier to end of correction at 4.4.4.
Oh, okay.
So we have 250 degrees from when we're physically born until end of correction. So what we're doing is from when we're physically born until the barrier, building our egoism, and then from the barrier to end of correction, we're building our altruism, which is our screen, basically. And then we reach end of correction. Now we have our full egoism with a full screen, and then what we're working is working with them together. And that's the work that we do after end of correction. All right, I think we'll stop here and enter the after party.